Başladı. Bekle bir saniye.
I think it's already start for YouTube channel. Hello everyone, welcome to Repack Talks. I'm Mehmet Batman from Turkey. I would like to announce our speaker for today. We are going to listen Mr. Tomasz Kasprowicz from Poland, who is the co-founder of Gemini company, and his topic is labor automation and possible scenarios of workforce adaptation in developing countries. Mr. Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes.
Firstly, welcome. We hope you are well during Corona days.
So far, so good.
That's good. That's good. Mr. Thomas, if you are ready, we can hear, ready to listen you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I hope to take just a little bit of your time today to discuss certain important elements of the changing labor market and the ways it affects the population. And the day we are meeting is actually quite telling because, as we all know, there are quite disturbing events going on in the United States right now, or were actually going on right now, just hours ago, where the angry mob was actually storming the parliament. And the topic of today's discussion is actually connected very much to what we have seen on the TV news recently. Because we are facing another technological change, we are facing another technological improvements that are reshaping the job market. This is in principle nothing new. Those changes are going on forever and are especially pronounced since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And even then, they were becoming so quick that the workers were actually feeling uneasy. That's when the ludist movement appeared. Those were the people that were destroying the machines because they were afraid those machines will take away their jobs. And they were not wrong. Of course, those machines did take their jobs and definitely caused at least temporal unemployment for some of those people that couldn't reskill. But all in all, over next 200 years, those improvements didn't decrease the employment on average. They actually were increasing the employment on average. And we see more and more workers and more groups of society being employed in the job market. The biggest part of it and the most visible one is definitely the participation of women in the job market. That was actually only appearing after World War II, or during World War II, actually. So what we see that the changes in technology are frightening for workers because they fear they will lose their jobs or their skills will become obsolete. And in the long run, we see that those changes actually are improving our well-being. They improve our standards of living, and actually what we see is constant development. But of course, still there are people saying that what we are facing right now is qualitatively different. Why? Because those changes are going to be much faster and much deeper than the ones we've seen before, and people will maybe not be able to prepare to those changes. And now what I'm saying, why the US events have something to do what we are talking about. Not sure if you remember, but Donald Trump won his presidency, at least a part, saying that he will stop the outflow of jobs from United States to developing countries, and he was actually attempting certain movements towards that. But if you look at the data, you see that the most jobs lost during last 15 years is not because they were moved to China, Korea, Bangladesh, or Poland, but because they were automated out. So even if all of the jobs came back to United States, that wouldn't change much. A lot of people still have been struggling for jobs because the robots, the automats, are actually taking away those jobs. And people struggling to maintain their way of life, trying to capitalize on their skills that are very quickly becoming obsolete, make them angry, make them frustrated, and make them all in all vote for populist politicians. And when they lose, they tend to get angry and violent, and that's exactly what we've seen yesterday. So this topic is actually very on point to what we see, and applies not only to developing countries, which I will be focusing on, but all of the countries everywhere. The technological change I want to talk about is connected with the rise of the automation and the AI, and the we can clearly see how this works and how this progresses. We can see that a lot of customer service is automated. Many tasks, mostly the ones that are repetitive, are being transferred to computers to perform those jobs for us. And this is something we could see for a long time, because the jobs that were automated in the first place were the ones that were dangerous or repetitive. And this is actually good for us in the long term. However, this automation is going more and more profoundly into service industry, that was so far absorbing the workers that were automated out of jobs in the production industry. So services are now at risk of automation as well, and there is clearly no way to say what those people will do, where they move, whether they will find the jobs or not for themselves. Of course, there are many caveats here, because as the research shows, the automation has very significant and strange features. There's this great study showing how effective is doctor and AI into the diagnosing patients with lung cancer. And what we see is that actually AI is better than a doctor. So what are the conclusions from that? Well, first of all, it seems that we should have AI instead of computers analyzing RTG pictures. But on the other hand, the same research shows that the patients don't want to be diagnosed by AI. They want the doctor to look at it. They want to have somebody, some person to face and discuss these problems. They don't want this faceless service for provided. So so that's one part of it. The second part of it is that further research showed that when you use AI and the doctor together, the results are even better. So it seems that in many places, AI and automations are complementary to what we see in for a long time. That if you introduce machines, it's not that you can replace the humans entirely. They actually improve each other's performance. Yet another truth that we are facing is that the technology is not as advanced as we would like to. So it means that in many cases, the flexibility of humans is well worth it to pay more or go for smaller efficiency. The best example is here Adidas, that was constructing two completely automated factories in Germany that were making shoes. Well, this is Adidas, by the way. Yeah. So what happened after 2 years? Those two factories were shut down, and the production was brought back to Asia, because, of course, shoes. But if you wanted to introduce even the tiniest change in the design, That was very costly to change the setup of the machines, and actually killed all of the flexibility for the company that was stuck with one type of shoe for a long time. And in case of humans, it's so easy to teach them to do these things a new way. So this was the reason why we've seen what we've seen. Therefore, the automation is progressing clearly, but is not progressing as fast as we might be fearing. Yet it's creeping up in the places that are kind of unexpected. Now, focusing on developing countries, we can divide the developing countries into several groups, and even include certain developed countries in those groups that were developing short time ago. This is mostly Central Europe, that was definitely developing countries for since last 5-10 years, and they were reclassified as developed about 5 years ago. Now, clearly, those developing countries have certain differences between them, especially with respect to how well they were doing in the last 30 years since the fall of the communism. And this is basically divided along very simple line. Which of those countries were able to be introduced and integrated into global supply chains, and which weren't? And again, those that were and were included in the European Union, for example, fare much better than those that weren't, especially those that were focused on natural resources. This is, for example, case of Russia, of course, where in 1991 per capita GDP in Russia was almost twice as big as in Poland. Now it's smaller than in Poland. That is clearly a huge political problem in Russia, trying to explain the populace why we are not developing very fast, and why the neighbors are going much faster than we are. And of course, there is this catastrophic case of Ukraine that, as we know, is actually at the level that is below 1991 level. So it's basically wasted 30 years of development. Those developing countries that managed to be included in the supply chains, global supply chains, were usually placed somewhere towards the beginning of the chain. Meaning at the very early stages of production, mostly the production that is labor intensive and requires a lot of labor. Therefore, those countries could be using their huge populations that were also skilled and hardworking, which allowed them to build the economy almost ground up. However, the beginning of the supply chain is the part of the supply chain that is actually the most influenced by automation. Therefore, this is a difficult time for the developing countries if we look at the developments in this area. Therefore, at the Respublika Foundation, we've made a project called European Democracy, which is basically looking at various elements of economic and social life and its influence on democracy. And we've looked at what could be the future of the work for developing countries when we look at the case of automation, and what could be the impact. Of course, what we fear is what we have on this picture is basically that we'll be replacing people with robots, and that's definitely something a lot of people is afraid of. This report was co-authored by me and Galan Doll, who is an editor and author at Visegrad Insight. This report you can download for free from our website, Visegrad Insight, the future of work in CE. So please feel free to download it and read it, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have later on. There are contact details for me as well, so please feel free. We basically developed 4 scenarios. What could happen for those countries in the coming future, depending how the economy and politics will be developing in coming years. And first of all, what we need to remember about, especially for developing countries, is what's going on with the demographics. What we see on this picture is old age dependency ratio. What is old age dependency ratio? This is basically showing how many old people are there per 100 people that are working age. Okay, so basically you can look at on the other side how many people need to chip in for one person's pension. What we see as a solid blue is basically more or less current state. It's 2015. It's 5 years ago, agreed, but not that much change in last 5 years. It did, but not that much. What we see as a black rhombus is the expected values for 2050. Okay, so what we can see that basically the old age dependency ratio will about double, or in some cases even triple, meaning that the burden of the old people for the young population will be much, much higher than it used to be. Even when you look at Japan, that is currently described as the oldest society in the world, we can clearly see it will get much worse. So currently is about 45 old people per 100 of working people. It will be 80. So it will be almost 1 to 1. So one working person will have to carry him or herself and family plus one elderly. But there are other countries that will fare almost as bad. Those are, for example, Spain, Greece, and Korea. In Korea, the old age dependency ratio will actually quadruple. And this is a case for almost all countries. So let's look at our hosts in Turkey. So currently, this is a very young society, and the old age dependency ratio is negligible, around 15. But in just 30 short years, it will be as bad as Japan today. So this is still something that all countries need to take into consideration. This is especially visible also for other developing countries. So here you see marked V4 countries, Central European countries. Well, where those numbers are not good to start with and will get much worse very soon. So this is a huge problem that we need to take into consideration when we look at the effects of automation. And looking from this perspective, actually the automation is not something developing countries should be afraid of. It's something they should embrace. Why? Because their element in the logistic chain was supplied by young and large population, the population that will be old and shrinking. So it needs to be replaced. And the only way to keep those factories in those countries is to replace those humans with robots. So if we don't embrace those changes, then we are basically putting ourselves at the risks of being kicked out of those logistic chains as not needed links. So basically, those factories that are currently in the developing countries will be outsourced again either to Asia, where the population, or maybe Africa, where the population will be booming, or will be nearshore to back to the home countries of the headquarters. So as we can see, this problem is even bigger because as the economy will slump due to the decreased production, the tax receipts will be also decreasing, and that's clearly causing a huge problem because large elderly population causes huge burden for the public finance, not only in the forms of pensions but also healthcare and long-term elderly care that is needed to sustain this old population. This will basically lead to some kind of generational political war, where the older generation will insist on keeping all of the perks coming with pension and healthcare and so on and so forth, at the expense of the younger generation. And this can be only done by increasing the tax burden on the younger, increasing it twice or threefold, which is clearly not sustainable. So if you double the taxes, well, the young will not accept it. And they won't be able to push back by political means because they are in a minority. Currently in Poland, about 1/3 of the entire voting population is over 60 years old, and almost half is over 50. This is clearly something that is very hard to overthrow in democratic process, and will only deepen in time. So basically, the only option for the young will be emigration, which will even more which will be even more painful for the elderly, because there will be nobody to squeeze for even more benefits. So not embracing automation is actually a problem. And while I'm not saying that the automation is only opportunities for developing countries, there are reasonable and real threats. Trying to shut it down is actually a road to marginalization, social unrest, and other problems. Those opportunities that we see from automation actually can be pretty easily missed by those countries. We can see clearly here, for example, a comparison of current use of robots in some developing countries, and we can see that there is a long way to go. Even the best ones like Slovakia and Czechia are at the half of the level of Germany, not to say anything about abysmal levels like in countries like Hungary and Poland that are so unrobotized that it's hard to imagine. This adoption of automation is therefore in those developing countries far too slow to actually take significant benefits. And this arises from various problems. Well, one problem is, of course, the problems of universities. And those universities in developing countries are usually not the best quality. Again, some universities from developing countries in Shanghai list. And as we can see, the best one we got here is in Prague, and it's 300th of universities in the world. The best Polish university is in the 400th. The best one in Hungary is in the 600th, not to mention the Slovakia that's even below that. Clearly, there's a problem with institutions, educational institutions in developing countries, and clearly to take advantage of automation, we need institutions that are actually able to innovate and produce well-skilled workforce that is able to work with robots and produce robots, program robots. This is clearly a huge problem that we see. However, our scenario number 3 is the scenario of a new golden age. That's the case where we actually will be able to reap the benefits of automation. this needs to be of course captured at the many facets. Education I already mentioned. This is very hard to do, as we know, because universities are very conservative by nature, and as such, very hard to change. It is possible that the only way of actually providing institutions that are able to deliver is to create completely new ones that are not in any way burdened by the old structures. That could be it. The other part is the adoption of immigrants and appropriate migration policy. This is very hard in recent years, as the rise of xenophobia and populism made it really hard to discuss the immigration issues, and the prevailing policy is to build a wall and not let anybody in, which is clearly harmful for everyone. But this is the climate we have right now. The alternative to that is basically populism. This is something that we already see. This is something I already discussed a little bit, but a lot of populist politicians are very good at going to the base of voters and convincing them that they will be able to stop any changes and bring the old good times back, and in one way or the other stop the automation, at least in a given country, without showing the long-term perspective of actually hurting everyone in process in the long term. We know that nobody cares about long term, but after 5 or 10 years, we actually see the results and the harm that is done. Regardless of which way we go, there will be groups of people that will be suffering due to the automation, and those are the ones that will be most likely targeted and supporting the populist groups, and then invading parliaments dressed up as bison if needed. Therefore, here the political approach to disarming this social discontent is very important. There are, of course, many ideas about how to go about it. One idea is universal basic income. Another idea is universal job scheme where everybody gets employed if needed. And there's a large discussion about that, mostly on the left side of political spectrum. All in all, we have arrived at policy recommendations arising from the analysis and scenarios we came up with. Well, first of all, what is always important, and almost any problem starts with that, is education. So what we need are dynamic education and reskilling programs. Yeah, we know that those changes are going so fast that people need to be able to reskill very rapidly and need the help to do it in an appropriate way. Currently, the employers are mostly not interested in reskilling the workers themselves. So this kind of support probably needs to be state funded. So changes in this respect are very important, not only on the level of the system of education, which is one part of it, especially the higher education, but also the continuing education, basically till the retirement, which will for many never come, as the retirement age will be increased over time. The second part of it is the question of how those new technologies will be adopted. One idea could be connecting it with climate change policies, as surprisingly those two topics are somewhat connected due to the efficiency of production that can be attained via automation, that can be translated into reduction of CO2 emissions. Another part is the question of dealing with obsolete skills and workers that have them. Of course, part of the answer is the reskilling programs I already mentioned, but of course we need to take into consideration also cases where this reskilling is not possible or not feasible for whatever reason, and we need to think what to do with those people, not to cause large swaths of discontent that may destabilize the political and social scene in developing countries, which is very easy, as you can see, not only in developing countries, but even in the oldest democracies in the world. There is also a question about the service industry. This is especially visible during COVID crisis. Definitely, that's the sector that needs to be still accepting workers that are being automated out of the production, and we know that a lot of those jobs will be kept and will be growing because there are a lot of situations where people prefer contact with another human being instead of a robot. Everybody facing automated customer service knows what I'm talking about, and basically trying to solve my problem that is not easily solvable and is not typical, and trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, and how to get to a person finally that will help us. That's something everybody struggled with, I believe. What is even more important is the question of spreading the wealth, in various ways, because this wealth is needed to create capital accumulation and for the poorer countries to be able to also reap the benefits of automation. Otherwise, we are facing a great divide in the earth, where there will be highly automated, very wealthy nations versus very poor, labor-intensive nations. This could be very unstable. We can see that this wealth sharing programs have mixed results. There are cases where this actually helped a lot, and those countries that received support were able to grow and get out of poverty. In other cases, we've seen actually the opposite, that some countries got actually dependent on this support and never be able to stand off their own feet. So this is an important issue that needs to be researched a lot, how to help in a way that it's helpful, but definitely this sort of support is needed. As I said, the more detail you can find in the report that you can download at this address. Please feel free to write an email or find me somewhere else on the social media. I'm open to all of the discussion, and I think that's it for me for today. Thank you very much.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for your presentation and also participation. Also, we would like to say thank you for being part of the Repact talks. I would like to just check our streaming channel. If there is any question, I will forward to you. And 1 minute, please.
Sure.
I think everything is clear. There is no question. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.